Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Creative Writing Workshop podcast. The title of this episode is Talisman. As always, you'll need a pen and paper or the notes app on your phone. The first few minutes will be a writing warm up. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about why I chose the topic, why it's interesting for writers, give you some broader context for what we're doing here today. And then we'll get to a main writing session. During the writing sessions, I'll talk about every 2 to 5 minutes, and the idea is that the spaces in between are an invitation for you to get some words down on the page. So I end up keeping track of the time, and you can concentrate on the writing. Though, of course, if one of the early prompts sparks something in you and you end up pressing pause and writing for an hour without listening to my voice, then that's success for me as well. The whole point is that you get words down on paper. At the end, give you a bit of a chance to reflect on what you've done, where it could go, what the best bits were, what you can apply to other projects. This podcast is really all about helping people to develop their skills and their craft through doing it. There's lots of writing advice out there on the internet, some of which is absolutely brilliant and very astounding. But ultimately, there comes a point where to be involved, we want to do it ourselves. And that's what this is all about. Let's go to a writing exercise for a warm up. Remember, the point of a warm up is that it can be rubbish. It's to switch off our self censorship for a bit. So we're just going to do about 7-8 minutes of writing. Today's warm up is an exercise in personification, which you kind of might expect from a workshop all about objects and talismans. So I'd like you to think of a treasured possession that you own. Perhaps it's your wedding ring. Perhaps it's something you inherited. Perhaps it's something you bought for yourself, but it has real meaning for you, or was bought at a very special time. So we're going to really personalize this one. Think of a treasured possession. And I would just like you to write about what that treasured possession might be thinking right now. Is it happy to be so treasured? Maybe it longs for escape, wants to go back to the kettle shop where all the other kettles live. Don't worry if it's rubbish. Just keep going. Remember, we're trying to get a sense of momentum because we know that that's one of the skills that a writer needs. It's just word after word after word after word. So, here we go. A treasured possession. Let it tell you how happy it is to be so treasured, or maybe have a moan at you, a bit of an attitude. Off we go. And if that's taken off for you, then you can ignore this quick prompt. But if your object has exhausted you a bit, maybe you could argue back. Tell your object why its desires are ridiculous or terrible, or why it's lucky to be treasured or will never escape. You can have a bit of an argument with your treasured object for another couple of minutes while we warm up. And as we come into the last 20-30 seconds of the warm up, let's try and find a place to finish. It might be the end of a rant. Maybe this has kicked off a couple of ideas inside you where you're like, I just don't want to forget this little nugget that I've invented. And the most important thing is to write that down, grab it in a bullet point, bunch of random disassociated words that will remind you of your ideas the next time you come back to this page in your notebook. But since we have to draw it to a close sometime, we will do it now. Let's just step back a moment then and think about objects. The title of this podcast is Talisman, which is an object with additional meanings. And objects can often drive the plot and play a really vital role in stories. And often that's because characters give them importance. So I'm sure you'd be able to add to my list, and please do so, because whatever is jumping into your mind when I read it out might be the kind of theme you want to mine for the rest of the workshop. But we can have characters who are looking for an object, and that might drive a mystery or an adventure story. The idea of finding something precious and important is obviously a sort of deep story structure that we will have seen over and over and over again. We can have secrets that are revealed by objects, which is obviously a big thing in a crime novel. Any kind of crime novel will usually have some kind of object in the wrong place, conveying the wrong information, undermining a lie or a story that somebody has told about themselves. And therefore, that object itself, it can be, something very mundane, takes on importance because of what it can do to the discovery of the crime. We also have secrets revealed by objects in comedy, so sort of farcical slapstick, high drama, comedic scenes might often have an object at the heart of them. We can have secrets that are insinuated by objects, something left in the wrong place, um, something just feeling slightly off or incongruent. And we might see that a lot in romance, I feel. The idea that you like someone, a character likes someone or is in love with someone and begins to trip up and can't control what's around them, or how they're perceived by the object of their desire. Interesting phrase. And that might lead them to reveal them things about themselves that they don't necessarily want to, which is part of growing intimacy and becoming close to someone, and objects can often play a part in that story. And of course, in comedy as well. We can, and I'm sure, I hope some listeners will be going all the way to magical objects. So, in fantasy and magical realism, objects can take on enormous importance for the powers that they bestow on the wearer or the keeper or the owner of that object. And uh, the We can have entire series of novels based around objects and collections of objects, putting them together, placing objects in the right place in a kind of ritual, quasi-religious type setting, and exploring those objects and tracing their histories is a fun part of fantasy as well. We can also have kind of symbolic and memorable objects, and they would crop up, I think, a little bit more in something like literary fiction, or maybe horror or historical fiction. Obviously, in historical fiction, we might be dealing with characters whose daily interaction with objects is very, very different from our own, such as the way they cook, or the way they just clean their house, or the way they convey messages and communicate with people. It all involves different objects than we're used to in our society today. So, stepping back from a work in progress that's novel length, I think, and just thinking, what are the important objects in this story? Where does the reader meet them, and where do they go? Can be a really useful thing for you to do as a writer. If you're a short story writer, you might be looking at stories that are more centered around an object. I do feel that objects can have their own story arc within a novel, and within a short story, to be fair. And that, again, is worth thinking about in terms of how your reader perceives them. So we can have expensive objects, stolen objects. They can be precious or ordinary. They can reveal the moral core of a character, but they can also reveal their corruption. An object might start out being unremarkable and become dramatically important. It could be an object of obsession, the type of obsession that borders on lust, and then the object almost becomes a character in the way that maybe an unrequited love might be, the way an unrequited love might be a character. Objects can drive people mad, and they can cause them to do extraordinary things. And it's also worth thinking about the fact that objects can be symbolic of a whole society. So something like the UK crown jewels contain diamonds which are contested and arguably stolen during Indian colonialism. And we can have objects which hugely represent something to many, many, many people. So it's also worth thinking about, does your object in your story just represent something for your character, or is it widely accepted to be an important and contentious object? Let's get back to some writing. We're going to choose a character. If you have works in progress, what I would say is you can drop a character into this and use today's session to find out a little bit more about them. If you are not working with one at the moment, don't worry, but choose an age and a name, maybe some kind of job or everyday activity that so we know where they fit in the world and what they generally get up to. But we don't need to know anything more about them than that because we're going to discover their character traits as we write about them. So an age and a name for our main character. We're going to write the moment when this character discovers an object, and discovered could be metaphorical in that its significance could be seen in a new light. This character might already know they own this teaspoon, but suddenly they realize the implications. So during the scene I'm inviting you to write today, your character is going to see this object in its glory and its magical significance. I'm going to try and make it kind of hum with life. And obviously that magic can be literal if you're writing fantasy, or metaphorical and insinuated and more sort of psychological and emotional if you write more in the real world. Perhaps in the scene we're going to write, your character will get to the stage of feeling as if the object is talking to them, sending them a message. So before we start, let's personify that object a bit and imagine what it wants and what it's trying to communicate. Perhaps it's something to do with justice. It could be recognition. Maybe your object will be trying to reveal some kind of secret, and you can pluck any of these out of the air. Maybe your object will trying to guide your character. Or maybe it simply wants to remind them of something important. And before we get down to the main writing exercise, just jot that note down on your paper. Like, what does your object want in the scene? Because it gives you some structure when you start to write. And also, I think it's interesting to decide at the beginning, does this object belong to this person? Or like, is it easy for them to access? Or does it belong to someone else? Obviously, if it belongs to someone else, we might be introducing quite a lot of conflict into our scene. If it belongs to them, we will end up with something a little bit more introspective. And that's completely up to you. And we're still just making notes at the moment. We're about to begin. Choose a setting. Here are some general settings where objects are found. The attic is a well-worn location for finding old and treasured objects, but no less exciting, I think, for having been used many times. The same with the shop, the magical shop or the charity shop or the antique shop full of mystery objects. They crop up so often in fiction because they're so recognizable for people in life. If you use them, then for a reader, you might really have to concentrate on making them different and exciting because your reader might have encountered this kind of scene before. But in a writing session, you can just do what you want. If you're not intending to share this, then and you're like, oh, I just love an old attic. They're so, they're so cozy and they're so familiar and I know what I'm going to do, then absolutely go for it. The same might be said of the library. But there are other places where we can find objects. We might go with something like a train platform, a gym locker, like a normal room with maybe, one slightly odd piece of furniture. And of course, there's the museum. If you want, you can think of somewhere else more surprising. I've gone with um, places where it would be obvious to find an object. So by now we've got a character with a name and an age. We've got an object and something it wants to tell our character. And we've got some idea of the setting. So we're going to kind of launch ourselves into this now. Let's begin by describing that setting so you can locate both you and your readers in where you are. So let's start with that setting. And if we've established a few um, details of this setting, let's zone in on your character and what they're doing before they're surprised by this object, before they discover it. So let's just have a couple of minutes of getting to know them first. And if we haven't got there already, let's meet your treasured possession, your talisman, and let's allow your object to make a very powerful first impression on your character who is finding it, possibly discovering it for the first time, possibly seeing something a little bit more familiar and realizing that it might be more important to them than they had previously thought. And if you haven't already, then let's lean into how your character feels about finding this object. Perhaps they are horrified. Maybe they feel threatened. Perhaps this is a moment of sheer delight and achievement. So if you haven't already, we're going to lean into that interiority. How does your character feel in this moment? And perhaps you've got here already, or maybe you want to ignore this prompt because things have taken off for you. But if you'd like some redirection and some focus, let's go back to what this object looks like, feels like when your character picks it up. Is it cold, hot, heavy, light, sturdy, brittle? Is it old and battered, or perhaps it should be old and battered, but it's eerily pristine? Let's spend a few minutes on the physicality of this object in detail. as we move into the final minutes of this session, let's have a couple of prompts which are some fun. So, does your character want to try and move it from this location? I began asking you to really kind of nail that setting and make a firm decision about it. Do we now, if you're a writer that likes movement and action and lots of things happening, and we've been here for a while, maybe we just want to move and open up this world and see what's outside that immediate space. If your character owns their object, might be quite easy to get moving. If they don't own their object, maybe we're into like a whole nother set of decisions and um, potential conflict. That's just something to play with if you want to. And a completely different prompt for our last couple of minutes, one which you can ignore or return to later. Perhaps this object sets your character off into a daydream about their future. What I'm kind of thinking of is the idea that they think, now I found this object, I can become, I can create, I can achieve. Allow them to kind of dream and predict a little bit for themselves what might happen now they've realized what this object is. And that might completely fit with your writing or not at all. So obviously it's yours to choose if you like. And now we'll begin to bring this writing session to a close. If you want to finish with me in a couple of minutes' time, then we'll keep going. If you're really enjoying it, then just hit pause and I'll shut up and you can carry on with what you want. But if you're going to finish now, let's try and find somewhere intentional to finish. Might be the end of a conversation or the completion of a train of thought. It might be the end of a description. Or once again, you might take the opportunity to write down a few words about where this could go, the ideas that you have in your brain that you haven't quite managed to get down on paper, because we often have a few of those when we finish a writing session. I threw a couple of really big prompts at you in the last few minutes of that, and of course, the secret mission there is to give you things to carry on with once the session is finished. So if you're thinking, I can't possibly get from where I was to escaping the museum in a 2-minute writing prompt, then no, of course you can't. Hopefully you do it in the next couple of hours. That's why I sometimes like to finish on a little bit of a crazy one. That, and sometimes I've just had too much coffee and just go, do something weird. Okay, let's pause, stop, read back, and have a think about some questions. Because this workshop was all about the object, what have you discovered about this object? Bearing in mind that when you switched this podcast on, you didn't have this object, it didn't exist, you've conjured it in the last 40 minutes of writing, and hopefully you've discovered something interesting and important about it. So it can be worth reading back and being quite factual. What is it? Where did it come from? Why is it important to your main character? Maybe you feel that this is the end of a story about this object, or perhaps it's the beginning. And when we create something and we first draft, it can be good to capture that idea, just because it's exciting to put something down on paper, to dream it up for the first time. But when we come back to it, we might need a little bit of a prompt about, oh, this is actually the last scene in a novel that I've created today. And or this is a scene 3/4 of the way through, and what came into my mind was all the places the object had been before, and just a few of the places it will go from here. Or you might want to read back and focus on the repercussions of this discovery for this main character. Is this an object that will have some kind of impact in their life? And in that case as well, is this something they've been searching for a long time? This is towards the end of a story you want to tell about them? Or is this the very beginning? They wake up, they find a ship in a bottle hanging around in the dining room of the B&B, and off they go into a crazy story. And if you could stop now and write for another 5 or 6 hours, regardless of, your creative energy, your other responsibilities, what do you think you'd like to do next? Whether it's going back to a single prompt, developing the character, developing the object, what would you want to do next? Because if you've got that written down, then of course when you come back in a few days, it'll just be there waiting for you. And as always, when you read back, I invite you to highlight, star, draw around phrases and words that you're really proud of, that you're like, yeah, I nailed that. That's really funny. That's a great punchline, or that's a fantastic introduction to this object. That's a great moment of discovery. Because what it's nice to do is, if we go back through our writer's notebooks, what we want to be able to see is things that excite us and interest us, and allow us to develop a kind of sense of achievement, and a sense that we're beginning to really nail the craft, and that the words on the page are interesting and fun. But also, when you go back and you have these phrases that you think are really good, you can, of course, pick them up out of this piece of writing, put them down on a blank piece of paper, and use them as your own writing prompts whenever you want to sit down and write. And I think a lot of writers have this kind of technique, right? Where we don't just sit down, look at a blank page, and try to come up with an idea. Once you've begun to develop a practice, and this is why it's interesting not to be a beginner anymore, but to be someone who's developing that practice. Whenever you sit down, you're sitting down to all of the things you've written before, and you're bringing all of that knowledge and all of that experimentation with you. And that's kind of why I do this podcast, is because I feel that you growing from your own experiments and your own craft is just as valid as consuming a lot of how-to content and advice and then attempting to kind of replicate that advice on your page. Your path might be different, and the best advice always reminds you that your path will be an individual one. That said, there are lots and lots of there's lots of really great content about writing, which I find really useful, and I'm sure you would find useful too. I don't know why I went off on that one. Again, maybe a little bit too much coffee, which I have now finished, and I'm going to go and make another one. So I hope you enjoyed that writing workshop on talismans. I definitely think it's one you can do over and over and over again with different characters, different objects. There are as many characters and objects as there are writers and moments of writing, in my opinion. It could go on for a long time. Join me next time when I'll be doing something else, which I have not yet decided because I'm me and I don't do anything in advance. If you are on a platform that allows you to comment and you'd like to provide some feedback for the workshop, then please absolutely feel free to do so, because this is all about me getting better as a creative writing teacher, and I really appreciate any feedback you might want to give. And you can go back through the podcast as well and have a look at previous episodes. There should be plenty there now, lots of other different topics for you to enjoy. And I'll see you next time.